I'm Kelsey, this is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I am bringing you one of my more exciting videos of the year. Well, exciting for me at least, your mileage may vary, but this is one that I have been absolutely looking forward to making for a very long time, and that is my anticipated releases for the second half of the year. This was the first year that I decided to split my anticipated releases into a first half of the year video and a second half of the year video. I'll link my video for January through June below in case you want to check it out. And I did that this year because I enjoy making these lists, and doing two videos is going to enable me to feature more of the books that come out in the second half of the year that aren't announced at the beginning of the year. I mostly read sci-fi and fantasy. Those are the genres I read and talk about on this channel the most, and so that's what these releases are going to be. The majority of these are going to be adult titles, but there are a few YA and middle grade titles on this list as well. A few disclaimers. First, the one that must go in front of any anticipated releases video, which is that all of these release dates and publication information are subject to change at any time. We have, of course, already seen a number of releases in 2020 have their publication dates pushed back because of coronavirus closures. Secondly, the disclaimer that is specific to my channel and how I do anticipated releases videos. My inclusion of a book on this list is by no means a commitment that I myself will A, read it, or B, review it. And certainly not in any sort of timely manner. I view this list as a resource for you, the viewer, so even if I end up never getting around to reading some of the books that I feature in this video, maybe my inclusion of them will lead you to your next favorite read. And this time around, I've got to say, that spirit of inclusion in deciding what makes the cut for my anticipated releases list means that I am including several sequels to books I've not read yet on this list. So yeah, definitely no commitment from me to read those in any sort of timely manner. Okay, now on to the books. First, I am going to give a shout out to the one book from my previous list for the year that did get pushed back to the second half of the year. That is Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon Lee, published by Solaris. This adult fantasy novel with an artist protagonist in a Korean-inspired setting has been pushed back to October 20th. The rest of these books I'm going to be listing in chronological order by release date. First, on July 7th from Harper Voyager, we have The Book of Dragons, an anthology edited by Jonathan Strahan. This is absolutely one of my top anticipated releases of the second half of the year. No doubt about it. Aside from the beautiful, beautiful cover illustration by Rovina Kai, who did the covers for not one but two books that are going to be on this list. This book is going to feature all new stories from a star-studded list of SFF authors. I'm not going to list them all, but of particular interest to me are stories by Patricia McKillop, Theodora Goss, Brooke Bolander, Sarah Gailey, J.Y. Yang, and others. And I do so love a good dragon story. This one I have pre-ordered. Next, also on July 7th, is Or What You Will by Jo Walton. And this is from Tor Books. Jo Walton is one of those authors whose work I really like, even though I've only read her more obscure books. I think if you're a casual viewer of my channel, you might assume that the books of hers I've read are, like, among others, or Tooth and Claw. I should read those, but the ones I've actually read are the Thessaly trilogy and Life Load. This seems like it's going to be a very meta type of story about books and writing. It's apparently about a character who is the fictional creation of an aging writer who is, I assume, a bit of a self-insert for Jo Walton herself. The book description is a little vague on the concept, but I'm assuming that fiction and reality are going to blur. Next, moving on to July 14th, also from Tor Books, we have The Relentless Moon by Robinette Kowal. This is the third book in the Lady Astronaut series, following The Calculating Stars and The Faded Sky. I have not yet read The Faded Sky, but I have read The Calculating Stars, so I'm like halfway to being able to read this eventually. The first book in this series won all of the things specifically being the Hugo, the Nebula, and the Locus. So the new entry in this alternate history science fiction series is definitely going to be hotly anticipated by many readers in the genre. Next, on August 11th from Harper Teen, we have the first YA title on this list. This is Star Daughter by Shveta Thakrar. I have read one short story by this author that I thought was really beautiful and lovely and magical. Scratch that, I think I've actually read two short stories by this author, and I'm not sure which is the one that I'm remembering so fondly. But I believe this is her first novel, and it's described as Neil Gaiman's Stardust meets Hindu mythology. It's about a girl who is, as the title suggests, the daughter of a star. Next, on August 14th, from Tachyon Publications, is Driftwood by Marie Brennan. I must admit, I can't glean much that's very concrete from the description of this book. It seems a little strange, but a little strange in a way that really intrigues me. It does look like it has some apocalyptic elements, perhaps. We'll see. Next, on August 18th, from Penguin Random House, we have Ikenga by Nnedi Okorafor, which is a middle grade title. And it's about a boy who can access superpowers once he is given an Ikenga, which is an actual object in Nigerian culture that's of spiritual significance. Next on my list is a sequel to a book that I have not yet read but do intend to read this month, and that is Drowned Country by Emily Tesh, the second novella in the Green Hollow duology from Tor.com. And this is coming out on August 18th. This is the sequel to Silver in the Wood, which is a take on the Green Man mythos. So I have been very excited to finally get to Silver in the Wood, which I am going to do this month because Emily Tesh is nominated for the Astounding Award, and I am catching up on some of my reading for that. In addition to the magic and folklore, these books also feature queer romance, and I have heard nothing but good things about the first book. Next is Elatsoe by Darcie Little Badger. This is the second book on this list with Rovina Kai illustration for the cover, and it's gorgeous. This is coming out on August 25th from Levine Querido, and it is a young adult fantasy novel with indigenous Apache representation and an asexual main character. And the description of this book has me so intrigued because this sounds like it takes place in a very sort of strange, magical, alternate contemporary setting, and when that's done well, that's something I really like. The sort of stuff where myth and legend is sort of woven into everyday reality. I've seen this described as a paranormal mystery, which could go either way for me, but I'm very intrigued. Next is the second middle grade title on my list, and the only graphic novel I am including, definitely one of my absolute most anticipated releases of the year, and that is The Tea Dragon Tapestry by Katie O'Neill. This is going to be the third and final book in what will be a trilogy, the first two Tea Dragon books being the Tea Dragon Society and the Tea Dragon Festival. And I love absolutely everything about these books. They are so sweet. They are so wholesome. They focus on friendship and compassion and inclusivity and finding your calling in life. The art is just so beautiful. Also, they have tea dragons. It's kind of the major selling point. They're these little dragons that bond very closely with humans and like grow tea out of their heads. Magic tea that when you drink it gives you fond memories of all the time you spent with your tea dragon. I love the Tea Dragon books. I love them, and I am equal parts just thrilled that there's going to be another one and like devastated that this is going to be the last. This is coming out on September 1st from Oni Press. Next is another book that is a sequel to something I haven't read yet that is absolutely on my TBR though. And this is A Dance with Fate by Juliet Marillier. That is the second book in her new Warrior Bards series that I believe has some tie-in connections to some of her previous novels. This is a Celtic historical fantasy about a brother and sister who are warrior bards, I guess. Her books tend to have fae magic in them, so I'm assuming this is no exception. I did have a NetGalley arc of the first book in this series, The Harp of Kings, and I just never got around to it because last year was trash and so was this year. But it is definitely still on the TBR and I'm definitely still gonna read it. Next, on September 4th from Tachyon Publications is The Four Profound Weaves by R.B. Lemgerg, which is the first novel-length story in the Birdverse, in which this author has apparently written a bunch of other short fiction, none of which I have read, but this book looks very interesting to me. This book apparently focuses on characters who are elderly and transgender, which is not representation that we see a lot of in fantasy. And some of the early reviews that I've seen have described the writing as being very beautiful. Next, on September 8th from Tor.com, we have Master of Poisons by Andrea Hairston. This is apparently epic fantasy that draws from both African folktales and post-colonial literature, and I don't need to know much more than that to be very excited by it. On to another book that I will definitely be pre-ordering because this is my absolute #1 most anticipated release of the year. Maybe my most anticipated release ever, like the most anticipated book I have ever anticipated. I don't know that I've ever been this excited for a book release before, and this is obviously Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is coming out on September 15th from Bloomsbury, and it looks absolutely nothing like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but in a way that I think I will also really love because this looks so strange and dreamlike. The main character apparently lives in an infinite magical house with an ocean in it, and he apparently has contact with only one other mysterious person. This seems like the sort of book that it'll be probably best to go into relatively blind. I don't need to know much more than that. It's under 300 pages. It's gonna be short. This is so exciting, you guys. This is so exciting. Next is a book that I hesitate a little to include on this list of anticipated SFF releases because I cannot actually confirm that this is going to have any fantasy elements in it. I initially assumed that it would because of who the authors are and what else they've written, but the description of this book sounds like it might just be YA contemporary. But even if it is just YA contemporary, I am still anticipating it. And this is Miss Meteor by Taylor K. Mejia and Anna Marie McLemore. Anna Marie McLemore is of course one of my favorite authors. They mostly write magical realism YA standalones, but I will read anything they write, even anything they co-write. This is coming out on September 22nd from Harper Teen. It's about two girls and a beauty pageant, and it seems to be about self-love and acceptance, and it looks like it's going to be all warm and fuzzy. I'm assuming there's going to be queer and POC representation in this, but I don't know exactly what that is at this point, so I can't say. Next is another YA title, this one that I think is going to be on a lot of people's radars, and that is The Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth Nix. This is coming out on September 22nd from Catherine Teagan Books. I actually thought initially that this was going to be an adult title, but Catherine Teagan Books is a kids and YA imprint, so I'm guessing that this is YA. Which makes sense, because Garth Nix is known as a YA writer. I don't think he's written any adult books. But this is a fantasy novel set in an alternate 1980s London about a girl in search of a father she's never met who teams up with a magical bookseller. Honestly, the magical booksellers angle, like, you have all of the fantasy readers in the palm of your hand the moment you say your book has magical booksellers in it, don't you? Next up on September 29th from Tor.com Publishing is Burning Roses by S.L. Huang, who is the author of a sci-fi thriller series that I have absolutely zero interest in, so the announcement of this book sort of took me by surprise, because this was not what I was expecting to be announced from her. This sounds like a fairy tale mashup retelling in an Asian setting, has a gorgeous cover by Victo Nye. I think the protagonists are going to be middle-aged women. I'm very excited for this. Next is a book I am only very cautiously excited about. And this is Over the Woodward Wall by A. Deborah Baker, which is a new pseudonym for Seanan McGuire. This is a middle grade book, technically, that is the book within the book that's referenced in Middle Game, which I am currently reading, and I am very much on the fence about. I don't know if I'm going to end up loving it or hating it or what by the time I'm done with it. I'm having complicated feelings about Middle Game. A. Deborah Baker is a character in Middle Game, or someone who is frequently referenced. And it seems like this book and this fictional author are integrated so deeply into the story of Middle Game that it's kind of hard to imagine reading this in isolation on its own merits. I certainly wouldn't recommend any actual child-aged middle grade reader who picked up this to then go on to Middle Game, because that would be a wildly inappropriate book. But this fits in the basic genre of whimsical middle grade portal fantasy that I am a sucker for it. I will possibly read it. I should mention this comes out on October 20th from Tor.com, which Tor.com does not usually publish middle grade fiction, but they are the publisher for this, presumably because they are also the publisher for Middle Game. I imagine that a book published by Tor.com and promoted by Tor.com is not actually going to make it into the hands of many actual middle grade aged readers. I'm presuming the readership for this is going to be mostly adult Seanan McGuire fans who liked Middle Game. Next on my list is The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. This is coming out on October 13th from Erewhon, which is a brand new SFF publishing imprint. This book promises both sorcery and romance in a world where women give up their magical powers when they marry. And we have a protagonist who obviously wants to keep her magical powers. This sounds like it's going to have some serious Fantasy of Manners vibes, and I love me some Fantasy of Manners. Up next is The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. This is coming out on October 13th from Orbit, possibly Red Hook in the US. I'm not totally certain on that. I know I am anticipating this because it is the next book from Alex E. Harrow, and I did love The 10,000 Doors of January. But have I even bothered to figure out what this is actually about? Maybe not, let's see. Oh, right, this is historical fantasy set in the 1890s with a bunch of sisters who are suffragette witches. Yeah, that sounds great, doesn't it? Next is the first book in a new series from Rebecca Roanhorse. This is Black Sun, coming on October 13th from Saga Press. I was not wildly in love with Trail of Lightning, but Rebecca Roanhorse can totally write. So I've been excited to see what her first adult novel would be that isn't in the Sixth World series, and it is this. This is the first book in a new series called Between Earth and Sky, and it is secondary world epic fantasy inspired by indigenous American civilizations. This looks incredibly cool, and I think I am more likely to pick this up than I am to read the second book in the Sixth World series. Next, on October 13th from Tor.com Publishing is Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clarke, which is a novella that takes on an alternate history of the Ku Klux Klan. Clarke's previous novellas have had a sort of anti-colonial steampunk alt history twist. This looks a little different, but I know that he's really good at alternate histories. And it looks like the publication of this is going to end up being unfortunately timely. Next, on November 10th, is another Tor.com novella. This is The Factory Witches of Lowell by C.S. Malarick. This is another American historical fantasy with witches, but this is about mill girls going on strike. So first we had the suffragette witches, and now we have the workers' rights witches. The fantasy releases of the second half of 2020 seem really intent on bringing us social justice witches. We are getting close to the end here, I promise. Just 3 more. On November 10th, from Ace, we have The Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry by C.M. Wagoner. This is Wagoner's second novel. The first, Unnatural Magic, is one that I have a copy of. I'm very excited to read. I have not gotten to it yet. The sort of cover design and styling of this initially made me think that this might be a sequel or a companion novel. I don't know if it takes place in the same world or not, but it definitely looks like the story of this one is a standalone. This is a book about 2 female bodyguards, and I think they fall in love. Next is, I promise you, going to be the last of the sequels to books I haven't read that is going to be on this list. But this is When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nhi Vo, and this is coming on December 8th from Tor.com. This is the sequel to The Empress of Salt and Fortune, which I have bought, I own it, I'm gonna read it, I promise. But again, that's a book I've heard such great things about. These are Asian-inspired fantasy. The first book was described as being a story of intrigue, court politics, and female power. This one, I think, has a non-binary main character, and it looks like it's more of a companion sequel than a direct sequel. And then the very last book on my list is coming on December 8th from Erewhon. This is the second of their books that's on my anticipated list for the second half of the year, and this is On Fragile Waves by E. Lily Yu, who has written a lot of short fiction before, but I think this is her first novel. This is a refugee story about a brother and sister whose family are trying to get to Australia from Afghanistan, and I am not sure what exactly the fantasy or fabulous elements of this are, but it seems to promise that it has some fairy tale or mythical element to it. And that's it. That's the end. Those are my many anticipated releases for the second half of 2020. Let me know if you're also looking forward to any of these books, if there are others that I didn't mention that you are looking forward to. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.